Welcome to the webinar on creative instructional design, 7 learning strategies that you can use by EI Design. My name is Deej and I will be your moderator for this session. The webinar will be hosted by Asha Pandey, who is the Chief Learning Strategist at EI Design. Before we proceed, we are extremely proud to share this moment with you. EI Design has been ranked as #2 e-learning content development company by elearningindustry.com, so we thought it's appropriate to share it with a wider audience. I will spend a couple of minutes to introduce what EI Design does. We were established in year 2002, so this is our 13th year of operation. We believe in creating what we call as systems of intelligence for our clients with a focus on continuous learning and impact on performance. Since our inception in 2002, learner centricity has been the core of our solution architecting. Our solution architecture defines the framework required to implement innovative solutions to meet the business goals of our customers. In the course of 13 years, we have built courses for several industry verticals, over 20 of them. But irrespective of the industry vertical, learner centricity has been the key focus area for EI Design. As part of our bespoke content development, we have developed in excess of 6,000 hours of e-learning content. We have about 1,000 hours of m-learning behind us. We have provided migration services to Fortune 500 companies. We have provided blended e-learning, virtual ILT, and we have provided localization services in 26 languages across 16 countries. Performance support tools, or PSTs, can be used to complement or supplement formal training. At EI Design, we have experience across several of the performance support tools that you see on the screen, right from mobile apps to webcast and podcast. At this moment in time, I'd like to welcome the Chief Learning Architect of EI Design, Asha Pandey, to walk you through the remaining part of the webinar.
Thanks, Deej. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar. And over the next few minutes, we'll focus on some of the live demos, which will give you cues on how you can use some of these creative instructional design strategies. And what I'm hoping that end of this webinar you will be able to achieve are pointers from each of these strategies, and they will be presented in a manner that you would find ways and means to relate to them and eventually apply them in your business. We'll also talk about aspects of, besides the creative instructional design, we'll talk about learnability, sticky learning, and from there, we build the approaches that we can potentially take to create these kind of learning experiences. However, my next slide starts with exact opposite of what I've mentioned so far, and it actually talks about forgetting. So we all invest time, energy, and money in creating the required training courses, yet the facts speak very differently. So what we note from here is that if there is no reinforcement to a given training, typically over a 30-day window, we would have forgotten almost 80% of it. So this is a very important aspect which forms the core of what I'm going to walk you through. So there is a need for us to determine that in the spectrum of instructional design and the capabilities that it offers to us, how do we make this learning stick? So there are definitely many ways that can be used to achieve this mandate. Today, we'll focus on a very strong strategy that we have implemented very successfully, which we call as creating a chain of impact. And in a moment, I'll walk you through what exactly this is all about and how exactly you could use this in your own context to meet the mandate, which is offset the forgetting curve, create the retention, recall, and effective learning curve. So let's move to understanding first what exactly is this chain of impact. And to apply this, what exactly would you need to take care of? Would you need to plan as part of your learning strategy? So as we know, the start point of the entire exercise is coming from your TNA or the training need analysis, and you've identified the possible training medium that you would like to opt for. From here, the challenge then shifts to how effectively we craft the training so that the learning experience indeed helps the learners internalize and learn precisely what they set out for. This is one part of the challenge where the effectiveness of the learning strategy is going to be the first feeder in creating what we call the learnability for the learner. Now, the next bit is a little more difficult. Yes, we crafted the right approach, the learners went through the program, the intervention happened at the points that they required, yet do they apply it effectively on the required juncture, at the required juncture? Do they apply it on work which is expected of them? So this bit is really the difficult bit. Now, if you take a step back, if all of these elements in the chain of impact are in place, then definitely there is a clear and tangible gain for the learner, which should convert also to an equally specific or definitive gain for the business. And if all these elements fall in place, would we see the required aggregation for a positive ROI to happen? So what we will do during the course of the webinar, we will look at some of the elements which help us improve the learnability. This is what I call as sticky learning, or the learning that lasts over a period of time. We will also explore some of the other options that you can integrate into your overall learning design, which can indeed push the envelope from knowledge acquisition to application. So during the presentation, we'll focus on moving through this creation of the chain of impact and look at some of the elements that you could use in your own context. Now, how do we go about it? Now, the start point, as all of us are familiar with, is the TNA identification of the formal learning is something that we are all very familiar with. But we also should be equally mindful of the fact that there is the classic 70-20-10 model which exists. And the internalization of learning through the formal channels is indeed only 10%. Yet, more often than not, the entire budgets are aligned towards only the formal learning piece. So the approach, one of the approaches that we have taken is to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Now, to achieve the required mandate, there is clearly a need to look at alternate channels to support the formal learning. A couple of things that we have done very successfully include usage of performance support tools and also the increasing approach of integrating social learning into the same platform. Now, these three elements put together enable us to move from discrete learning to learning path-based learning or learning as a continuum. So if you recall, we saw in the forgetting curve diagram that because there isn't an intervention or a reinforcement, there is a steep decline in what you learned. Now, this can be offset through some of the options that I will show you as we move forward. And I'll illustrate with a couple of examples on performance support tools to show how this has been done. And these are actual practical examples of using these PSTs. Now, along the same lines, you can also look at some of the assets that you may already have, look at redesigning, make them more learner-friendly, make them more organizational-centric by making them trackable and so on and so forth. And I think the most significant aspect in this ecosystem-based approach is the fact that while these pieces may be there, they may be gelling, they may be moving the learning forward, having a constant set of activities that help us checkpoint and relook at how we could be taking the way forward. So this is one of the important aspects when we look at engaging the learner, not just through discrete learning, not just through formal learning, but really engaging them in learning as a continuum or learning through learning paths. So I talked about offsetting the forgetting curve by using some of the sticky learning design approaches. The list that you see here is by no means exhaustive, but I put together some of the approaches that are fairly well established, and out of these 6 that you see here, we'll touch upon 4 of them in the examples that I will show you. So what do I have in store for you? As you saw in the title of our webinar, we're going to be looking at some of the practical aspects, right? We are not here to talk about reinvention of wheel or fire. Most of these elements are known to you. I know many of my audience today comes from a strong instructional design background. Many of you are L&D professionals who understand learning strategy. What we would be really doing is the difference between instructional design and the creative instructional design. And this is precisely what I will showcase as I move forward and take each of these examples. Now, I think I've talked long enough, maybe a small opportunity window to see how you respond to some of the things that I want to check with you. So what I'm going to do is we'll open the first polling question. Okay, now you see a very simple question which is appearing on your screen. Do terms instructional design and creative instructional design mean the same thing? Right? So I see some of us beginning to respond. I'm going to time it for a few more seconds and then we'll see how the results look like. Fantastic. So this goes to show that everybody is up and engaged. Thanks a ton. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to close it for a moment and let me just pull out what are the results. Good. So it saves us about another 2 minutes of my monologue, which would have been that they do mean 2 different things. So as I said, that when we look at the approaches that we're going to be taking, and as I walk you through some of the examples, we would be talking about approaches that you pretty much know. But the twist in the story-based learning or a scenario-based learning, which will make the learning stick. That's really the difference that we are talking about. So what I'm going to do is that I'll just exit from my deck right now, and then I'll move to the demos that I want to walk you through. So before I do that, just give me a second. A quick overview of the first 3 demos that I've chosen. As I mentioned, my first 3 demos are based on story-based approach. Now, the first example is a course designed for instructional designers. And in the process, what we did was that we see this entire learning paths through the protagonist, Nina, a young instructional designer. And the bifurcation of information that needs to be picked up by the learners, the foundational or the fundamentals of instructional design, are captured in her journey in sense of what she prepares for before going to the interview. Then she goes through an interview and, of course, a testing piece. And the testing piece moves the information to the next level. During storyboarding, what is it that she should go with? She gets selected, and on the job, she learns the specifics of specific workflow, the best practices, the guidelines, which are highly specific to the organization that she's going to be part of. Now, bringing this narrative helps everybody relate to the situation. By bifurcating these elements of information, allows people with different experiences, different expectations from the course, very seamlessly move through it, yet they don't lose the primary thread. So this is the first approach that we will see. The second approach is different, although it again uses the story-based approach. Now, to choose the right audio strategy can be a lot of times very, very tricky. So in this situation, we have the main protagonist, Michelle, who goes through a particular course and realizes that the audio was indeed taking away from the learning experience, right? In the journey to evaluate whether this was the most appropriate one, or should something else be adopted for this particular course. Now, these are the aspects that we build through 3 characters who evaluate these learning strategies. But remember, they are not experts. So we did need a couple of people who could help them when they were not quite certain how to move forward. They could also provide the guidance and the cues in determining what would be the best way possible, what kind of guidelines would make sense, and so on and so forth. So here we have added the component of branching within the primary narrative that you see. So again, the idea of starting with a challenge, characters that people could relate to, sometimes with the best of the effort, the strategy may or may not become the most appropriate one. And as I show you the example, you'll see how they go through evaluating a given strategy. The next strategy, which is again based on story, is little different. The context is very, very real life, a particular mandate to which the instructional designer responds by creating a storyboard. Unfortunately, the reviewer feels it represents the most obvious way to represent, not engaging enough. Now, in this kind of a context, what should you do? Now, here we also have an added challenge in the content, which is that for each content type, you would find that the information is similar, which meant that there would have been a high repetition of information if somebody were to go through it in the classic instructional design format. So the variance that we brought in, I will explain to you as we walk through this demo. So let me take a moment to move to the demo links that I want to show you.
Left.
So this is the first course I talked about, where we are using the protagonist's journey through interview and moving forward to getting selected, and then the 3 junctures at which we share the required information, right? So we begin with the day 1 when she's in an interview, and at this stage, the foundational aspects are being taught. Okay, you would see a slight delay in some of the screens because there's an audio at the back end. So just bear with me. Okay, so this was the level 1 of the information that we are doing. Then we move to the next level. The essential prep is in place. Now we get down to the next level of inputs that we need the instructional designers to be aware of. So we've presented it through. She took the test, and we see the kind of questions and the responses that she presented, and that becomes the learning cue. A slight delay because of the audio playing. Okay, so now we dig deeper. Key aspects to workflow. How significant are the assessments in the given strategy, and so on and so forth, right? Now, from here, then we move on. As I mentioned, that beyond this, when she actually gets the job, now to understand the best practices, the relevant approaches that the organization follows in the workflow that the instructional designers should use. So we use the third situation to bring in the elements which you actually need to apply. So it goes through the sequence of the workflow as you see here, and each stage defined. Another important thing that we've done here is that the questions are all aligned for 3rd level of cognition, which means that we see how the instructional designers, the target audience, is able to apply this learning. And the examples, the situations analysis that we push them through, all reflects very, very realistic situations that they would be required to go through. So now let me just move to the second demo, which is on the audio strategy. As I mentioned, here we will start with a problem. So the main protagonist goes through a program and finds it to be very distracting, right? The audio doesn't seem to be making sense or adding any value to her learning experience. Now, this is a good way to start rather than giving them the cues of the fact that, these are possible strategies and pros and cons of each. So this is how we start. So we have the learner's attention, and we move from here to determine what possible approaches are there and how do you assess the merit of a given strategy. So give me a moment. Yeah. So then we come to a juncture where now you have a branching scenario. Each of the options has a case study. The learner needs to evaluate the case study. Then there is a knowledge check to be certain that the learner has indeed understood the merit of using a particular strategy. So I'm just going to pick one of these to walk you through. So again, just bear with me. There's an audio playing at the back. So in this particular case, there is a detailed audio, which is the detailed narrative which is going on, and slowly the visuals are building up without having any on-screen text, right? So having analyzed this, there is a quick question that would this be relevant for majority of the courses? So let's see, what does it do? Now, the objective of the question is to help you understand where the strategy would work and where would it not be relevant, right? And then the learner can return back to the evaluation of the other strategies, and from there we move to a point where the mentors and the guide can give further inputs on how you can really strategize with this. So let me just move to the screen, which allows us to converge this learning into what we finally need as a takeaway on the job, right? Tips, best practices, and important guidelines. So this is how what we did here, as you would see, is that yes, there are multiple ways to evaluate, to look at integrating audio. Each strategy has a plus and minus. What was equally important that Michelle, through this journey, was able to overcome the challenge that she started with, and she could now pinpoint that what strategy would have actually made more sense. Okay, so with that, I'll move to my third example in the story. Now, in this case, as I said, we are looking at two challenges. Now, the information type is extremely repetitive. We are talking about content types, and we are matching them to the different interaction levels which can be applied, right? So the key here is pushing people from instructional design to creative instructional design, right? So how do we do that? Again, we start with a problem, a challenge, which was on a course to be designed on firefighting. And in the process, the storyboard that is generated by the instructional designer doesn't seem to appeal to the reviewer. And in the process, what happens is that we need to bring in another perspective to how you could have crafted this. So we introduce a couple more characters who help the main protagonist in reevaluating what more was possible. Today, it is not adequate that we just lay out the facts in a particular manner. The way to engage the learner needs to go a little beyond that. Now, the backdrop of this challenge, the need to re-evaluate the options, and very specific before and after assessment of the approach forms the backdrop of this story. So we start with the current situation. We constantly look at viewpoints from these three people who are part of the main narrative, and then we see what more is possible. So in a given situation, the view that Sandy has is that the feedback is not making sense. The current situation is pretty well handled by my approach, right? Very clearly, taking the approach to map the information to the prescribed visualization approach becomes the second viewpoint that the second member or Ken has to offer. And Ruth believes that we can step up the quality of the storyboard by making some of the tweaks that Ken is suggesting, right? So again, we are bringing in the real life situation that sometimes just because we are very close to the strategy that we are recommending, we miss some obvious things. So it also tells you the power of deliberation, looking at the other viewpoints. Again, very practical, very, very realistic. So this is how it builds. And what we do then is that we take instances, we look at the current treatment for each one of these situations, and then we see that if we had to remap, make it more engaging, we're talking about sticky learning, higher learnability, what would be the way forward, right? So having this crisp before and after approach in a very easy, no prescriptive, no holier than thou attitude, again, things that we can relate to, we can understand, is the sticky learning approach that we've used here. Okay, so what I will do is that let me just pause the demos here for a moment and we move forward to another question. Now I'm changing tracks slightly to performance support. And I'm sure this is something that a lot of you would have experienced, would have possibly used as well. So let's see how the audience responds to this. Okay, so I see quite a few good responses out there. Yeah, so I'm just going to close the poll right now and let me share the results. Very, very interesting. So I think most of us are in agreement that the performance support tools can indeed push the learners towards application. You know what the good news is? Another 2 minutes saved because I wasn't sure that this is the response that I'm going to be getting. So let's move back to where we were. So what I will do now is that I'm going to show you a couple of performance support tools which were designed to support 2 of the 3 demos that I just showed you. Now the challenge internally at EI Design we have is that in our instructional design team, we have people with very varied experiences from 3 to 4 years, which is the entry level, to people who are into 8 years or 10 years, right? However, with our quality mandate, there is a prescribed workflow that must be followed. That's what helps us ensure a consistent and a predictable quality. So this was a performance support tool that we provided. It is available in multiple formats, including the desktops. It's also available on their tablets and smartphones. And we'll see how this, in very, very simple format, helped us improve the conformance to our mandate. So people started following the workflow with the required diligence that we wanted them to do. Second is, I think this is my personal favorite, is we saw several strategies that are potentially possible in the selection of audio. And how do I see that in real life when there are multiple pointers, there are multiple facets that I need to evaluate, and the impact of certain decisions that I make early on to determine the strategy will have an impact on eventually how the learning experience is going to be. So we'll go through this demo to see. And what you see on the right gives me a set of cues. How am I faring as I'm making those choices? And it also allows me to recalibrate some of the decisions that I may have made. So what I'll do is that let me just move back to the demo panel. So the first one I'm going to be opening is, it uses a technique called kinetic text or very simple text animation. In this case, it also has audio. So I'm just going to play the audio for a short while so that you get a sense of what kind of impact it would create. No images, very, very simple, focuses on what we want learners to action. Okay, and with this, I'll move to, as I said, my favorite demo, which is looking at a particular case. How should the approach of integrating audio be done? So let's just take this. Let's make some choices and see how I fare. Okay, so now it gives me a clear cue. I'm not quite progressing in the direction that would lead me to the required goal. So again, I can rethink, look at the choices again, and let's see how I fare. Okay, so it looks like I was able to step up. And bingo, I definitely reached where I wanted to be. Okay, so now we've used this approach of a performance support tool not only to supplement or complement the e-learning courses, but equally effective as very safe evaluations for the instructor-led programs. So this is something which is really a very, very powerful approach that we can use. So what I'm going to do is that I'll move back to the next batch of demos that I wanted to walk you through, which feature. So I've taken two instances of, again, showing you creative instructional design, although we are using the classic scenario-based approach. Now, the two courses that I've picked up, which include the TNA, as you see on the screen now, and the overview of learning theories. Now, both of them have a challenge of fairly dry content in terms of the theoretical aspects that you need to learn, and understanding that certain aspects, if they are not applied right, can really throw your entire program off gear. So teaching not only what is the right way, but also explaining how it has to be applied in a real life situation, what you should be mindful of when you are defining the required approach. So I will show you two instances from training needs and overview of learning theories, and let me show you how we've used the power of scenarios in slightly different formats. So the TNA piece uses a master scenario, the introduction of a customer, and excuse me, just for a moment. Sorry about that. So we have a customer situation, a call center, the training needs from that side, the approach that is taken by the instructional designer, and the step-by-step process that she goes through. And then we see that some of these things, if are applied in a real-life situation, how do they lead to the required gain? So again, we talk of a master scenario, things that people can relate to. And this backdrop is constantly used to connect back to the theoretical aspects of the learning. Excuse me. So this is how we do the build-up. We help the learners evaluate that the training need analysis does not necessarily lead to training only as an option. Sometimes coaching, mentoring, some of the supplementary measures also. So all of those aspects which are relevant when you are crafting these solutions in the practical world are taught. And as we go through some of these aspects, we connect back to the situation. Right? So as the elements of what we learned, we went through, we are able to connect back to the master situation that we had started out with, and we get to know that what we have learned, this is how we can apply, and then we would see the required mandate being met. Okay, so on a similar note, slightly different take of the same scenario. Now, we all know the learning theories. There's pretty much one way to learn, right? You're taught that what is the theory about and how should you use it. So in this case, what I'm going to do is that I'll show you that we look at the theory and its relevance in a context. So we see a situation where, again, the instructional designer is posed a particular aspect, and then the exercise that she does, how did it incorporate elements of behaviorism, right? So we're doing the reverse approach here. So a lot of times we may be intuitively doing some of these aspects. This tells you, this is the theoretical framework, this is why it is relevant, this is how you can implement, this is what it will guarantee as the required impact. So you saw that between the two scenario-based situations, this is where the difference was. It's very interesting. I'm going to take one of the questions that just came in, that is there really a difference between the scenario and the storytelling? What we have done is that we've used the story, the thread of story, as the primary element to connect the various learning pieces. Within that, we could have subplots which could have been scenarios as well. Okay. On the other hand, the scenario-based approaches, which I just showed you through the TNA and the current overview of learning theories, has them in what we call as a master scenario or a master case study, which means that I'm running actually two tracks. There is the master case study, and then there is the learning path. But at certain junctures, we are connecting and we are evaluating whether what we learned, how are we able to apply, and have we applied it correctly. So that's the only the difference that you will see. So story in turn can have multiple scenarios. We saw branching scenarios in the audio strategy. The primary story was these characters who are adopting e-learning the first time, and some of the challenges that they go through. Okay, so after this, now I'll move to one of the very, very simple approaches, which is we are guiding the learner, we are nudging the learner to move forward through a series of questions and answers. Now, what we did in this particular case, this was the course on introducing mobile learning to instructional designers. So the simple thread that we took was, when this was the when you're first time looking at designing for mobile devices, you're likely to have some questions. So we just use the thread of these questions to show the learners how they can go through the exercise. Okay, so that's something that we did here. So let me just walk you through this demo, and after that we have another polling question for you. So what I'm going to do is that I'll switch the audio back here for you to get a sense of how the questions were used to thread the learning. Just a moment. I just move to the right frame and I'll just put the audio on.
What is the value that the mobile device brings to the learning space? The anytime, anywhere access that mobile devices provide is the medium's biggest advantage. It facilitates learning in diverse forms. For example, the blended learning approach in the form of social learning and performance support. It enables collaboration through a combination of applications such as email, IM, SMS, MMS, videos, and so on. What are the potential benefits of M-learning? What are the challenges or concerns related to M-learning? Varied shapes, sizes, screen display, and resolution are the many concerns associated with the mobile medium. The challenge is to find a way to present content that meets all criteria. Some of the
So as you would see that in this case, the creativity was in the simplicity of the approach that we took. So we do know as an instructional designer, if we are coming from the traditional e-learning format, our core instructional design principles don't change. So it was important to understand what does not change, what are the new aspects that I need to now factor for, and what is it that I should be careful about, what should I watch out for to create an effective multi-device strategy. So we felt in this case a very simple approach of a question and answers would be very effective. One of the other examples that where it was equally relevant is another course which I'm not using it for a demo right now, but which was to teach the assessment strategy. Now there the content adapts well to the questions because finally it is on the assessments, right? So what I'm going to do is that let me just move out of the demos and let's take a look at another polling question for you. Okay, this question is moving to a slightly different dimension. So far what we had done, we started with the challenge of forgetting. We introduced the fact that there is a need to look at ways to make the learning stick. We talked about extending discrete learning to learning as a continuum. We talked about evaluating informal learning aids like the performance support tool, potentially even social learning, to extend the discrete learning to learning as a continuum. Now what I'm picking up is something which is slightly different. Now, as all of us know that the transition from traditional e-learning to mobile learning, designing for multi-devices is a reality today. For instance, at EI Design, in the last 1.5 years, pretty much 100% of the material that we are creating is designed for multi-device. Now, multi-device delivery also brings in some exciting opportunities, but does it also mark some significant changes in the way we craft the learning experience? So what I'm going to do is that let's take a look at the third polling question. I'm going to launch it now. And I look forward to your inputs that if you believe that the usage of microlearning would become an extremely significant factor . Interestingly, people are changing options, okay? So the meter is varying. So I think I'm going to give it a little more time. This is very interesting. So another 2 more seconds and then we'll close. Let me show you the result. So I think I have a very, very well-informed audience. So I'm saving another 2 minutes here. So all of us are in agreement with the changing learner demographics, flexibility on devices that the learners choose to work on. This is exactly where we are headed. So what I'm going to do is that I'll show you another demo, which is on a subject which can be boring, although it's very relevant. It's on time management. It's a dream of all parents, all of us in the corporate world, and we wish it existed to the degree that we want all of us, all of our team members to have, right? So this uses the approach of a scenario, and we'll see that when we move into the realm of micro learning, what are the changes we need to make to our traditional e-learning format? We'll also see that how can we bring in stickiness of learning, and we use a slightly different approach here. We use the approach of a small gamified activity, and I'll show you in a moment that how can we step up the recall on the important takeaways from this particular course. So I'm going to just switch to the demo. So one of the significant things, obviously, is very relevant for designing microlearning, is that we don't have the room for a lengthy intro to the course, objectives, overviews, and so on and so forth, right? So we need to get to the point in the first 10 or 15 seconds, and from there on, we need to make sure that the elements are not broken into theory, analysis, checkpoint, and so on and so forth, right? So we start with a scenario, the outcome of the scenario leads to the theory, and from there we have some practice exercises and we move from there. So what I'm going to do is that this course also has an audio. I think it will be relevant for me to play some of the sections with the audio, and then I'll pause when we move to the gamified activity.
Stressed, missing deadlines, facing a meltdown, no work-life balance. If you can relate to any of these, take this course on time management and regain work-life balance. The next 10 minutes will enable you to explain the steps for effective time management, use the tools for time management, identify the key time wasters, and use the urgent and important matrix for managing tasks. Up next is a scenario that will help you understand how improper planning can impact time management.
So while we were within the 10-minute window for the piece, the moment we start taking the courses on a smartphone or a tablet, we need to give back that control to the learner. So further bifurcation of each nugget within this piece is also very clearly detailed. So you can catch it as you're waiting for a meeting and so on and so forth.
This is Ray, an architect. He has 2 design submissions to be made to the client. Meanwhile, his supervisor asks him to submit his last month's report on an urgent basis. He submits the report, but hastens with the deliverables to meet the deadline and ends up delivering poor quality products. If Ray had planned to submit his last month's report earlier, it would not have become an urgent task and interfere with the core task that Ray was performing. Proper time management helps increase available time, offers greater work-life control, helps identify and eliminate time wasters, improves productivity, makes setting and achieving goals easier, reduces effort to complete a task, and reduces stress. There are various tools available to manage time effectively.
So as you saw, the theoretical aspects are woven into the narrative, which is the scenario that we are going through. So next I'm going to pick up my thread of sticky learning, and I'm going to pick up an activity which needs the learners to separate out that during their day, during their work day, the different tasks and the activities that they are involved in, many of them are time wasters, and sometimes we don't even realize that that is the case. So, and the first key to efficiency in time management starts with the identification of these activities. So in a classic instructional design format, this would have been a drag and drop into 2 respective buckets, which are the right and the wrong one. I'm not sure that to what degree would this have been retained by the learner. So we made a small change to this exercise, and I'll just show you how this small change can improve the stickiness, because we are pushing the learner to pay attention. There is an evaluation within a particular time that the learner needs to go through, and then the choices are made, and there are some grading that happens alongside. So I'm just going to start this. So the key is I need to read within a certain time, evaluate whether this is the case or otherwise, and I also need to constantly check out how my scores are happening. And if I choose an incorrect option, there's also a negative marking which is going to happen there. So I lost some marks there, and so on and so forth, right? So again, as I said, the creative instructional design knows no boundaries. All that we are really doing is that look at many more ways beyond the obvious. Put yourself always in the learner's shoes and make sure that the information is in a form that I remember, I register, and I am definitely given the ammunition to push it to the required application. So let's move back. So in terms of the demos, these are the examples that I had planned to showcase to you. What we will do is that before we wrap up, there are a couple of things that I just wanted to share with you. Some of the examples that I started with, the first few pieces which were all on instructional design, they are part of our online suite on instructional designers. And this suite of 15 courses talks about the application of theory and how effectively each of the courses also can be designed, can be used as a case study in itself. So all of you who have been part of this webinar, as part of our thank you note, we would be sending you an access. It's an absolutely free access for 30 days. So take a look at these strategies. Tell us what more would you like us to do. And I would be really pleased if some of these ideas ignite ideas at your end. Please write it to us and tell us that how you have used them, how you have adapted them, and how have we helped you improve the stickiness of learning. I'm also on the journey of demystifying gamification. Gamification with focus on the learning impacts that it can create. So that's the topic of our next webinar. I'm currently writing this ebook. It's going to be released in January, and we will have a follow-up webinar. And this would feature gamification for serious learning. And I'm going to be touching upon 6 potential facets of learning needs where it can be applied. And these range from induction, onboarding, to compliance, to soft skills, behavioral change, etc., etc. So what it would do is it is building up on our core learning design capability. It is building on creative instructional design, yet not losing the focus of, the serious learning. We want learners to walk away with a sense of accomplishment, time well spent. And by the same token, looking at the second part of the exercise, which is the money spent by the business translates to the required gain. So that's something which is up in the cards. And Deesh, do you want to tell me how many questions do we have, or should we be taking a few questions, or should we be aggregating them and forward them later?
Yeah. Aggregating them. Asha, we will aggregate these questions and provide a PDF document with frequently asked questions to all the audience that attended today.
Yeah. So I really want to thank all of you. And we had over 100 people, and I think we have a huge bunch of questions as well. What we'll do is that we'll put them into a very interesting format, interactive PDF with a difference, featuring creative instructional design that we've talked about. And it's a great way for us to reconnect. And in terms of learning strategies, where else you feel the ideas that I shared with you, you could use, you know where to contact me. It's on my last slide. And with that, we are ready to wrap up the session. So thank you very much. And I think Deej has some last words to add to the discussion today.
And as Asha mentioned, there is an ebook and another webinar that we are planning. We look forward to having you attend that webinar as well. Feel free to communicate with us. The contact details are on the screen. And with that, thank you for the time that you have spent with EI Design.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day, evening ahead.